will we take it?
Are we going to take it? Are we going to let the Washington Kings rule over us? Or are we going to stand and fight for our liberty? My name is Eric Brakey. I'm a two-term state senator from Androscoggin County. I'm a constitutional conservative, and I believe in liberty for the little guy. And that's why I'm challenging Angus King for the United States Senate this November. Now, I'm going to start with a question, and it's the same question I ask everywhere I go. So if you know the answer to this question by this point in time, you can just shout out the answer. What city is the richest city in America? Washington, D.C. Absolutely right. The 5 richest counties in America are all suburbs directly surrounding Washington, D.C. Of course, that leads us to a whole other question. Where did all the money come from? How did Washington, D.C. become the richest region in America? I mean, Washington, D.C. certainly isn't known for manufacturing. They're not known for agriculture. They're not known for finance. They're not known for producing anything of value that people voluntarily hand their money over in exchange for. But Washington, D.C. is known for one thing they do far better than anywhere else in the country: stealing from the rest of us. Stealing from our paychecks with taxes, stealing from our future with debt, stealing from the very value of our savings and our retirements every time they print new money from thin air, devaluing every dollar currently in circulation that we've been saving up for our futures. This system works out incredibly well if you're one of the big guys in Washington, D.C. Big government keeps growing bigger, and the big corporate welfare special interests keep lining up at the taxpayer trough. But for us little guys here in Maine, Maine people being among the highest taxed and lowest paid in the country, what are we getting from this arrangement? I wish I could say that we got nothing. Wouldn't that be a great problem to have, actually, if Washington, D.C. just left us alone? But the sad truth is we get far worse than nothing. We get the bill. $21 trillion in debt. And $113 trillion in unfunded liabilities. Do you know how much that comes out to for every single American taxpayer? Raise your hand if you're an American taxpayer. I see a lot of American taxpayers here. Well, I have some good news, but I also have some bad news. And I'll start with the bad news. Thanks to Angus King and all the big spending Washington Kings, we are each of us, every single taxpayer here, individually on the hook for $1.1 million. That's our share of the national debt and the unfunded liabilities. Now, I don't know if anyone here has that kind of money to hand over to the Washington Kings, but that's what they're counting on. They're counting on us to bail them out. And it isn't stopping anytime soon. Washington, D.C. borrows over $1 million a minute. Over the course of this 2-day convention, Washington, D.C. will have borrowed another $3 billion. And what are they spending it on? Is it benefiting the little guy? Of course not. Washington, D.C. is handing out hundreds of billions of our money in corporate welfare to well-connected special interests. They're sending our money abroad to welfare for dictators in Pakistan, arming rebel groups in Syria allied with ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and bombing and rebuilding bridges in Afghanistan while our own infrastructure crumbles here at home. They're so focused on pleasing their Washington friends and satisfying their America Last ambitions abroad that they have forgotten about the very people of America who pay their bills. But I said there was good news. And there is some good news, because if you're like me and you've had enough, if you aren't going to take it anymore, the good news is we're coming to take our government back this November. We are marching into the heart of Washington, D.C. to drain the swamp, to defeat the deep state, to topple the kings, not only to reclaim our money that they've taken from us, but to reclaim something even far more precious that they steal from us on a regular basis. As Ronald Reagan warned us a generation ago, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. It's not something passed on through the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for the next generation for them to do the same. Or one day we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children about that time in America when men and women were free. That torch of American liberty, handed down generation by generation from our nation's founders, it rests in our hands right now. And it's depending on us. And I gotta be honest, that flame has grown very dim. Our First Amendment is under attack as free speech is called hate speech. On our college campuses, students handing out pocket constitutions are arrested. And anyone who utters a politically incorrect thought sparks riots and in many cases loses their job. The radical left is attacking our right to keep and bear arms on an unprecedented level, laying their agenda bare for all to see as a former U.S. Supreme Court justice calls for the complete repeal of the Second Amendment. And Angus King, Boo is right. And Angus King himself has voted to surrender our firearm rights to the United Nations. A national surveillance state is growing up around us, disregarding our Fourth Amendment, as Washington, D.C. collects the phone records and internet histories of every single American citizen. And as we saw now in recently declassified memos, under the Obama administration, our federal government even spied on Donald Trump and his presidential campaign. When the Nixon administration was caught doing this in Watergate, he was forced to resign from office. But when the Obama administration abused government power to spy on political opponents, the mainstream media told us it was no big deal. Our 10th Amendment lies in tatters as Washington, D.C. dictates unconstitutional policies from one-size-fits-all health care to one-size-fits-all education from 500 miles away. And our young men and women are sent overseas into decades-long, undeclared wars with unclear missions. Our American troops deserve better than this. Our young men and women sign up to serve for the noblest of reasons. They agree to lay their lives on the line to defend our country, to defend our Constitution, and to defend our freedom. Shame on any politician who takes advantage of that sacred trust, demanding these sacrifices from our soldiers for anything less than an America First mission. Our soldiers, absolutely. Our soldiers didn't sign up to fight for global interests, nor did they sign up to fight for the special interests. They signed up to defend America, and it's time to put America first. And I have to say, President Donald Trump is doing just that. During the campaign, he calls for an end to the failed policy of nation building, for less entangling interventions across the world, and for far better deals. And if he needs to drop a few Twitter bombs to achieve peace in regions like Korea, I say tweet away. I'm running to champion the cause of liberty for the little guy in the U.S. Senate on behalf of all Maine people, because we deserve better than what we are getting. Of course, people tell me all the time, Eric, we're glad that someone is challenging the king. But the truth is, he's a big guy, and we're all little guys. So we must have no chance. You know, I've heard this story before when I first ran for state senate in 2014. I ran in a Democrat-leaning district against a 36-year Democrat incumbent who had never lost a race. People told me, Eric, it's cute. That's the word they used. They said, Eric, it's cute. It's cute that you think you can run and you think that you can win, but the truth is, he's a big guy and you're a little guy, and you have no chance. But I ignored them. I went out and I knocked on 8,000 doors, talking directly with Maine people about constitutional government, fiscal responsibility, and personal liberty. And when all was said and done, not only did we win that unwinnable race, we won in a 20-point landslide. Because here's the truth that I've found, is that Maine people are sick and tired of the politics as usual. We are sick and tired of the politicians who stick their finger in the wind and see which way it's blowing, especially when we, the taxpayers, are forced to pay for the windmills that wind is blowing. And when I arrived in Augusta, I did exactly what I said I was going to do, sponsoring and passing constitutional carry, so all Maine people can exercise their Second Amendment rights without... We can exercise our Second Amendment rights without the need for a government permission slip. Leading the negotiations for welfare reform, prohibiting the purchase of alcohol, cigarettes, and lottery tickets from being purchased with Maine welfare dollars, and defending Governor LePage's work requirements for able-bodied adults without children. Because welfare is supposed to be a hand up, not a hand out. And passing right to try, restoring for terminally ill patients who have exhausted all the FDA-approved treatments, their right to try experimental treatments not yet approved by the federal bureaucracy. Because when you have only 6 months to live and the government takes 10 years to approve any new drugs, why should government stand in the way of your right to try? And as we just saw in the horrifying case of baby Alfie in the United Kingdom, government is not always interested in preserving your right to try. Every year I've been in office, I've been ranked the most conservative voting member of the Maine Senate, but also one of the most independent. In fact, I think if you put my voting record up against the voting record of the supposed independent we have representing us in Washington, D.C., I think you would see quite a contrast. I've been a real independent in the state Senate because I don't follow party leadership. I don't follow the special interests. I follow this document right here, our United States Constitution, which I swore an oath to uphold and I take very seriously. And for all the accomplishments we've had these last 4 years, while I've served in the state Senate, I didn't do any of this by myself. I didn't win that state Senate seat on my own. I didn't pass constitutional carry, welfare reform, or right to try on my own. The truth is, if we depended on the politicians in Augusta or Washington, D.C. to give us our freedoms back out of the simple goodness of their hearts because one state senator asked nicely, we would be waiting a long time. All these accomplishments were possible because we all did it together. Everyone who called and emailed and let their legislators know that their re-elections were at stake. We may be little guys standing alone, but when we stand and fight together, we are an unstoppable political force. And I'm going to need your help again to win this fight in November. When they tell us that Angus King is too big to fail, I say the bigger they come, the harder they fall. And when the Israelites looked at Goliath, we all know what they first thought. They looked at that giant on the field and they were intimidated. They said, he's so big we cannot win. But David stepped forward and he saw something very different. With his stone and sling in hand, David said, he's so big I cannot miss. What the Israelites saw as Goliath's strength, his gargantuan size, turned out to be his greatest weakness. He was so big that with He was so big that when David took aim and swung, he didn't miss, and Goliath came toppling down. And the same is true for the king we are going to topple from his throne this November. He may be a big guy, but his voting record is so big and so out of touch with Maine people that I don't think we can miss, as long as we take aim and swing at the trillions of dollars in debt that he's racked up for our country, and the billion-dollar hole he left the state of Maine in when he finished his time as governor, at the hundreds of billions in corporate welfare he's racked up and handed out to well-connected special interests, and at the continual trampling of our Constitution that he's conducted these last 6 years. You know, Angus King likes to tell Maine people that he's an independent. Let me ask a question. Does anyone here think that that's true? Raise your hand if you think that Angus King has actually served as an independent. Not a single hand going up? Well, this is going to surprise everyone today, but I'm actually going to raise my hand. I know this may surprise you, but I look at his actions and I have to say I think I've actually figured it out. I figured out how he's an independent. Of course, to be independent, you have to be independent from something. So what is Angus King independent from? Reality, I hear. Well, that may be a good point. I didn't think of that one, but that's very true. So is he independent from party politics? No, not really. I mean, he caucuses and votes with the Democrats. He's got a more partisan Democrat voting record than many of the actual registered Democrats. In fact, he's carrying the water for Chuck Schumer there every single day. Is he independent from the special interests? Not really. I mean, he was a lobbyist and consultant for big energy companies, and he's receiving millions in Washington, D.C. special interest money to finance his re-election campaign. But I did figure out what he must mean. The one thing he is actually independent from: us, the Maine people. That's why after winning election in 2012, he immediately bought a house in his home state of Virginia, and then went on national television criticizing others in Congress for spending the weekends home in their districts with their constituents. That's right, he told Meet the Press that two of the biggest problems in Washington, D.C. are that the politicians spend too much time in their districts, and also, get this, that there are too many politicians who have been in Washington, D.C. for less than 10 years. You heard that right. Angus King's proposal to fix Washington, D.C. More career politicians who spend decades full-time in Washington, D.C. Does anyone here think that that is going to fix our problems? No. You know, perhaps instead the solution is different. Perhaps we need fewer career politicians. Perhaps we even need term limits. Perhaps we need leaders who will fight for our liberties and work to get Washington, D.C. out of our lives. Now, my name is Eric Brakey. I believe in liberty for the little guy and the future of our liberty, that torch that is in our hands right now, our inheritance as American people. It is at stake this November. For the last 4 years, I've fought for our liberties and our tax dollars in Augusta. And now I ask you to send me to Washington, D.C. so I can take our fight into the heart of the deepest swamp that we know here in America. Join me in this fight. Stand with me to defeat the Washington machine. Stand with me to restore liberty for the little guy, because we're not going to take it anymore. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. We look forward to your victory in November and to having two conservative, strong voices in the U.S.